This week, an email landed with a subject line about a seizure of assets, bank accounts, movable property, everything I own, ordered under a paragraph of German tax law. The Bundeszentralamt für Steuern, it said, my federal tax office. Attached was an HTML file named like a formal seizure order, the kind of document that's supposed to make you panic first and think second. I didn't open it. I read code instead. What was inside took 3 layers to get through. An invisible animation trick built to run code on a page without anyone ever seeing a script tag. The kind of thing designed specifically to slip past a scanner that's only looking for the obvious signature. A block of hex pulled out of a CSS style sheet, of all places. Underneath that, 68 kilobytes of ciphertext, encrypted with the same algorithm banks use to move money. A 16-byte key sitting right next to it in the same blob, waiting to be found by anyone who bothered to look. I decrypted it by hand, and near the top of the code that came out, printed in plain text, was my own email address, hard-coded. Not a placeholder, not a template variable waiting to be filled in later. Mine, specifically with a campaign number attached to it, like I was one row in a spreadsheet somewhere, tracked alongside everyone else's who'd been sent the same trap with their own name stitched in. Whoever built this hadn't mailed it to current resident. They'd built infrastructure to process me, specifically, at scale. One victim at a time, each one getting a page that looked exactly right for them. The fake page underneath it all was a pixel-accurate copy of the real text office's login screen, right down to their actual logo, pulled live from their actual servers. So it would never go stale even if the real site redesigned tomorrow. That's not a rush job. That's a product built by someone who understood exactly what good enough to fool a careful person required, and then went further than that anyway. Here's the part that actually got under my skin. And it isn't the phishing. Phishing is Tuesday. What got under my skin is what happened next, on both sides of it, from systems that are supposed to be the adults in the room. First, mine. I run a privacy contact address for my own business, required by law, checked by anyone doing due diligence on me before they sign anything. The moment that phishing email landed in it, my own help desk fired off an automatic reply. Not a generic "got your message," a real one. It greeted the sender by the name they'd faked, confirmed their request under Articles 12 and 15 of the GDPR, and promised a full legal response within 30 days. Read that again. I had automated a legal commitment to a criminal. Not because the law required it, because a rule I built years ago checks exactly one thing. Did an email land in this inbox? It doesn't check whether what landed deserves the response it's about to get. It reacts to the shape of the thing. Right address, right format, arrived through the right channel, and skips the only question that actually matters, which is whether any of that is real. Then I went to report it. The tax office has a public warning page about exactly this kind of scam. So I went looking for how to flag it to them and to Germany's Federal Cybersecurity Agency, whose entire job is supposed to be exactly this. What I found instead was a maze. A reporting page built for companies under a regulatory obligation to disclose incidents, not for an individual holding a live sample of criminal infrastructure they'd like someone to act on today. Not the page that gets you anywhere fast, and not the one the site leads with. Someone eventually found me a real channel, a direct line that would actually work, sitting well past anything the site surfaces on its own. I still didn't use it. Not because it doesn't exist and not because nobody handed it to me. Even with the shortcut in hand, the default path had already done its job. It had shown me credibly that chasing this wasn't worth the hour. And this wasn't the first wall like I'd hit this year. A few months back, my son's class went on a school trip to a climbing park, and he brought home a waiver I had to sign, a list of rules. Fine, that's normal for anyone climbing at height. Except the same form also collected full home address for no stated reason, with no privacy notice anywhere on it. Drafted, I later found out, by a well-known law firm that specializes in exactly that area of law. Their own website didn't mention data protection either. I could have filled a complaint. I did the math on what that complaint would cost me in the time against what it would actually change, and I signed the form and moved on. At some point, the cost of the search outweighs the value of the report, even when you are someone who spent the morning reverse engineering a criminal's payload by hand. That's not laziness. That's a system doing exactly what it was quietly built to do. Make availability technically true and access practically optional. There's one mechanism underneath both of these, and once you name it, you'll see it everywhere, not just in my inbox this week. Systems get built to react to the shape of a thing instead of checking its substance. Automated ones and bureaucratic ones behave identically here, once they are big enough. An email in the right mailbox looks like a legitimate request, so it gets treated like one. A reporting page that technically exists satisfies a legal requirement to offer a channel, so the requirement is met, whether or not a real person under time pressure can actually use it. Shape is cheap to build and cheap to verify. Substance is expensive. It means reading the actual content, questioning the actual claim, designing for the person trying to use the thing rather than the audit that will later confirm it exists. Every institution I ran into this week, mine included, had optimized for the cheap version. I've said on this show before that certificates are a poor proxy for competence. Same mechanism, smaller stakes. A certificate is shape, a document, a logo, a line on a resume that took a fixed number of hours to obtain. Whether the person actually understands the thing the certificate claims they understood in substance, and it's the part nobody in the room has time to check, so the shape gets treated as if it settles the question. An ex-Google credential on a LinkedIn profile works the same way. So does a vendor's ISO certification that's planned but not yet obtained, said in a tone that implies it already hangs on the wall. Once you have seen the pattern, once you start seeing the same trait happening everywhere. Cheap, checkable shape, standing in for expensive, unverifiable substance, and almost everyone accepting the trade because checking costs more than they are willing to pay. This is the same failure I keep landing on with this show in different clothes. The problem is rarely the problem you were told about. The GDPR never required my helpdesk to send legally binding text to an unverified sender. I built that shortcut myself years ago. Because reacting to shape was easier than checking substance, and nobody ever tested it against something adversarial. The law didn't require the reporting page to be a maze either. Somebody built it to satisfy an audit. The audit got signed off, and once the audit passed, nobody ever went back and asked whether the page actually worked for anyone standing outside the building trying to get in. A diagnosis without a move is just complaining with extra steps. So here's what changed. First, I fixed my own shortcut. My helpdesk no longer commits to a legal process on receipt. Every inbound message gets a plain neutral confirmation, no legal language, no borrowed name repeated back to the sender. The Article 12 and 15 language, the 30-day clock only goes out once I've actually looked at the message and confirmed it's real. One extra step on my side for the handful of requests a month that are genuine. That's the entire cost of checking substance instead of shape, and I'd been paying zero for years because I'd never once tested the rule against someone who meant me harm. Second, I stopped counting a form exists as reporting works. If you're building any process meant to catch something adversarial, a fraud channel, a security disclosure page, a complaint process, measure it by how long it takes a stressed, time-poor person to actually get through it, not by whether the page exists that technically satisfies the requirement. If the honest answer is a maze and a lot of luck, you haven't built a channel. You've built a defense against having to read one, and you've probably convinced yourself it's the opposite. Third, and this is the one I'd actually ask you to sit with because it's uncomfortable in a direction I don't get to dodge. I looked at what I do for a living through the same lens. Strategic opposition exists to catch exactly this failure because before it costs someone real money, a plan that satisfies the shape of due diligence, the deck looks right, the references check out, the logo is impressive, without anyone checking whether the substance underneath holds up. I spent my working life telling other people to stop trusting the shape. This week I found the exact same shortcut sitting inside my own help desk, built by me, running unchecked for years. Nobody's immune to their own blind spot just because they get paid to find other people's. That's not a caveat to the argument. It is the argument. Here's the sentence I keep landing on. The people trying to rob me built a better product than the people supposedly protecting me. Not because criminals are smarter, because their business model requires the whole funnel to actually work, end to end, or they don't get paid. The personalization, the encryption, the pixel-perfect fake login page all exist because a broken step costs them money. Nobody's incentive on the other side works that way. The reporting page doesn't need to work. It just needs to exist. My old help desk rule didn't need to be right. It just needed to fire. So don't ask whether the checkbox is there. Almost everything has a checkbox there. Ask whether the thing behind it actually does the job under pressure for someone who didn't build it and doesn't already know where the real door is. Check the substance. The shape was never the point. See you next week.